Hi everyone, thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm Francesca Howell, Development Manager at the SOA, and this session is on how to sell your writing in interviews with Anna Caig. This event is part of our SOA at Home Festival, a 12-week programme of online events which is running until July. All events are free to attend, but if you can afford to donate a few pounds to the Authors Emergency Fund to support authors in financial difficulty due to the health crisis, please click on the link to our GoFundMe page, which will be at the top of the chat on the right-hand side of your screen. If you're on social media and want to tweet about the festival, please use hashtag SOA at Home. This session will run for an hour and 15 minutes with plenty of time for questions. You can post questions and comments in the chat, and Anna will pick these up at the end. There are a couple of points during the session where Anna will ask for volunteers. If you'd like to volunteer, please press the small hand icon to request to speak. You'll need to turn your audio and video on, and then you'll be on screen with Anna. Anna has worked in communications for 17 years, specialising in media relations, corporate reputation management, and strategic marketing campaigns. She now works with traditional, indie, and self-published authors to help them find a wider audience. Anna's approach, described by one writer as how to promote your books with heart and creativity, explores how personal branding and marketing can work hand in hand with the inspiration behind the writing process. I'll hand over to Anna now. Thanks for joining and enjoy the session.
Thank you. Thanks, Francesca, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We've got a huge amount to get through today. As Francesca said, if you want to, usually when I run these sessions in person, I like them to be really interactive. I like there to be lots of chat between me and the participants. So there is a lot to get through, but if there's things that you'd like to contribute, if there's questions that you'd like to ask along the way, then please do feel free to do so. I can kind of toggle between my presentation and the chat and have a look at what you're saying. The things that I'm not able to answer as we're going along, I'll do my best to pick up in the questions at the end. So yeah, thank you all for coming today. My name's Anna Caig. I'm a tutor on the Journalism Masters at the University of Sheffield, and I also run my own business, as Francesca said, where I train writers in how to brand and market themselves. And part of that is learning about how to talk about yourself in interview situations. And in particular at the moment, as you know, a lot of these interviews are increasingly happening online due to the lockdown. So we thought it'd be really useful to talk to you today, both about media interview skills and also the really specific set of skills that you probably want to think about when you're going into an online interview setting. Okay, so what I'm hoping you're going to get from this session, I'd like you to go away from this session today with an understanding of what you can say in interviews in order to sell your books. And the single most important thing, we'll spend a little bit of time on this because it really is the most important thing that you need to do, is be really clear about what your key messages are. What are the things that you absolutely want to convey to the audience of that interview? And this just isn't just for traditional media interviews. This is if you are filming yourself for a piece of video content for your own website, if you've got yourself a guest slot on a podcast, if you've got 5 minutes before an online reading where you have the opportunity to just talk about yourself and your writing. In all of those settings, if you go in with a really clear sense of, okay, these are my key messages, this is what I am here to say, that's the single most important thing that you can do. We'll talk about how you can do justice to your work when you're under pressure and with limited time, the best ways to prepare for an interview setting. So we'll be really clear about developing key messages, what it is you're going to say in order to sell your books. Then we're going to move on to how you say it. So this is the interview skills, how you make sure that you take that interview setting and you really make the most of it and convey what it is that you want to convey. And then we'll have a bit of a couple of slides on some really practical advice around online interviews, because there are some particular things that you will want to be thinking about with online interviews. Okay. So as I said, quite a lot to get through, but please do ask any questions as we go. And I can't actually see my presentation and the questions at the same time, but I can toggle between the two. So if I miss your question for a while, then please do bear with me. I'll try and look as often as I can throughout the session. Okay, so what should I say? As I said, thinking about your key messages, what you're there to talk about is really the most important thing that you can do when you're getting ready for an interview situation. So how do you go about developing these key messages? What do I mean by key messages? Now, what you'll be wanting to think about is what really stands out about your books. As you all know, this is a very crowded marketplace. What is different about you as a writer? What will readers really want to kind of hook onto about you and pick your book up over all the other books out there, and really think about that and what those distinguishing characteristics are. What will readers get from your books? What will they take away from the experience of reading one of your books? And what you really want to be thinking about here is conveying your personal brand as a writer. It's important when you're putting together key messages to be really clear, okay, am I talking about myself as a writer overall? Am I talking about my whole body of work in this interview? Or, as you know, a lot of interviews will really be focusing on launching one book, where you'll really want to be honing down on what it is that's really special about this particular book. Both of those are fine, but it's just important to be clear, okay, what am I here to do in this interview? Is it me generally as a writer, or am I really trying to get people interested in this book specifically? You can also include really practical information in key messages. So you will want to be thinking about your personal brand as a writer, but also potential readers need to know, okay, when is my book out? What's the release date? Where can they buy it? Any special offers, that sort of thing. So that's absolutely fine to include as a key message as well. Now, this is where I said we're going to spend a little bit of time thinking about key messages here, because this really is worth a bit of thought to get it right. Because if you get your key messages right, that is you're halfway there to performing well in an interview situation. So when I say that I want you to be able to convey your personal brand as a writer, what is it that I mean by that? So discovering your personal brand as a creative person goes right to the heart of why you create in the first place, and getting to the heart of why you create goes right to the heart of who you are as a person. So I do a lot of work with different writers and other creative people to explore this. And what we're looking to come up with is a version of yourself that you are happy and comfortable sharing with the public. So exploring this, the process of exploring this can sometimes involve looking at aspects of yourself, what's inspired you to write a particular book at a particular time. And you might think, do you know what? That's private. I want to keep that out of the public arena. But that process is really important, because I want you to imagine a Venn diagram where one circle is you as a person in all your whole imperfect entirety, including these elements of yourself that you decide you'd like to keep private. The other circle is your creative output. So that's your books, what you create. And the area in the middle of that Venn diagram is your personal brand. That's what we're looking to convey to an audience when you sit down to have an interview or create a piece of video, or whatever setting you're using these skills in. So the process that I go through with writers is to really look at establishing this well-defined version of yourself that is going to be your author persona, which then we can use as the basis of all your publicity and all your marketing, including digital and social media. And a really important part of that will be the key messages that you want to convey in any interview setting. So what we're going to do, just because I think this idea of differentiating yourself from everyone else out there is really important. We're going to look at a few examples of creative people who've done this really, really well, who've created a really distinct, well-defined, clear personal brand. Okay, so hopefully you can all see that image. And I'm going to go and look in the chat now. Can anyone tell me which filmmaker created the film that's a still from? Oh no, it looks like it's frozen for a few people. Ah, they're all coming through, yes. Yeah, that is indeed Tim Burton. Okay, so you can tell from almost any still from any film by Tim Burton that you're looking at a Tim Burton film. So what is it? How would you describe his personal brand? How do you understand that you're looking at a still from a Tim Burton film there? You all got it right. There's not a single. So he's created a really strong personal brand for himself that is around, yeah, absolutely. Wacky, ghoulish, great description, quirky characters, gothic, absolutely. Strange, dark, oddball, slightly weird. Yeah, absolutely bang on. So gothic, quite playful, so very dark, but quite playful with it. He's also quite emotionally resonant. So whether you're looking at a live action film, whether you're looking at a cartoon, there are certain things that mean that you understand that you're looking at a Tim Burton film. So I'm going to give you one more example of a creative person with a really strong personal brand, just to really clarify this idea of what I'm talking about here. So does anybody know what artist this is an artwork by? Banksy, yes, well done. And same question, how did you know? How would you describe Banksy's personal brand? What is it about this this picture that means that you know that you're looking at an artwork by Banksy? Yeah, absolutely. So he's quite political, isn't he? He's quite challenging. Yeah, the fact that it's outside, the fact that it's clearly outdoor art, political, social commentary, yeah, reflecting society back. Yeah, fantastic. So this is really just a couple of examples that I wanted to give you to really think about what I mean by this idea of a personal brand, and to have a really strong platform on which to build your marketing strategy as a writer. A personal brand is really what I work with writers to create that, and everything else becomes so much easier once you've got that really clear, strong personal brand. So another way to think about this, we know what we mean by Tim Burton-esque, we know what we mean by Banksy-esque. I want you to think about your name as a writer and use the suffix esque. And what is it that you mean by that? Alex English, what do we mean by Alex English-esque? What do we mean by Mary Oliver-esque? What is it about your work which we can say is really distinctive? This is just another way to think about this. I'm never sure whether to include this poem or not. It goes one of two ways when I include this. But I think a lot of people find this quite inspiring. Oh Me, Oh Life by Walt Whitman. You know, you are here, life exists, an identity. The powerful play goes on and you may contribute a verse. And another way of thinking about your personal brand is, okay, what is my verse? What is it that I'm here to contribute with my writing? What is it that I'm saying with my writing? So we're going to do a little bit of an exercise. We're not going to spend a long time on this, so please don't worry about getting this absolutely perfect. This is really just an exercise to get you thinking about what your key messages might be in an interview situation. So I'm going to get you to do a little bit of visualization for me. I hope that you've got a pen and a piece of paper with you, but I'm going to get you to put that to one side just for a minute. To start with, I'm going to get you to close your eyes and visualize for me, and then I'm going to get you to open your eyes and write down what you've thought about. Okay, so this is an exercise that I use with writers to really get to the heart of their personal brand and think about what it's all about for you. What is at the heart of your writing? So I've tweaked it slightly for today, and we're going to try and use this to come out with some ideas for your key messages. So I want you to close your eyes. I know we've got writers from a lot of different stages of your career here with us today, but so a lot of you will already have a really strongly defined, successful personal brand that you're happy with. But if you don't, I want you to visualize that you're at a point where this work that we're doing together has been successful. You have created a personal brand as a writer that you're happy with. It's out there. You're reaching readers who absolutely love your work. Now, one of these readers, he's out in the pub, he or she is out in the pub with his friend, or I got told off for saying they had to be in the pub. They might be on a lovely socially distanced walk with another friend. And they're saying, I've just read a book by this fantastic writer. They're just so great. They're really my cup of tea. And their friend says, so what? Tell me about this writer. What are they like? What's that all about then? And I want you to imagine what your ideal reader says in return. So what do they say about your work? This is somebody who really gets you, who understands exactly what it is that you are trying to convey with your writing. So your ideal reader is talking about why they love your work, what stands out about your work, what makes it distinctive from all the other writers out there, and why they are going to buy everything that you ever produce. So it's really important to bear in mind that this person bears no relation to and has never even met your inner critic. This is someone who just thinks you're the bee's knees, absolutely loves your writing. What do they say? So I want you to open your eyes now, and I want you to just write down maybe 2 or 3 things. And this is the point at which I am going to ask possibly 1, possibly 2, depending on how time goes, to share. Because what we're going to do is use what you write down here as the basis for thinking about how we can turn that into key messages that you will take into an interview situation. So I want you to think about what this ideal reader is saying to their friend about why they think that your work is absolutely fantastic. So I'll just give you another couple of minutes to write down what they've said to their friend. If there's any questions, if anything. Oh, Sally says she finds that practically impossible. Is that because you find it difficult to be wholeheartedly positive about? Well, there's a couple of people that I really want to read there. I really want to read these books. That if the issue, Sally, you said that that's tricky for you. If the issue is about being wholeheartedly positive and enthusiastic about your own writing, that's kind of what the aim of this exercise is, to get your inner critic to just move to one side for a while, and to really think about it from the perspective of a writer who really understands what it is you're trying to do. So I know it's difficult, but do try and silence your inner critic as much as you can. Oh, some of these sound great. So what I'm going to do at this point is ask if anybody would be willing. So what I'm looking for is maybe 2 or 3 sentences that you've come up with as part of this exercise, and then we'll just have a chat about how we would go about turning that into key messages. So I think the way this works is if you click on the speak icon, if you're feeling brave and you're happy to share what you've written. If not, that's absolutely fine. I can just, there's some great examples here. Aha, we have a brave volunteer. Okay, so Simon, you were first. Let's go with Simon. So I think what should happen now, hopefully seamlessly, is when I click on you, Simon, your audio should go live. So let's see if that works. Simon, are you able to speak now? Let's have a look at that. Okay, that I can't hear Simon now. I'm going to try one more person just because it may be that I know you've come on here not expecting to use your audio. So let's just, okay, I think the second person was Rosemary Brown. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to accept you, Rosemary. If not, what we'll do is just I'll have to read some out of the comments. So Rosemary, are you able to speak? Okay, not to worry. We've got loads of absolutely brilliant examples in here. So I'm going to read out Katrina's. So Katrina thinks that her ideal reader would be saying to their friend that her books are all about accessible science, an infectious love for the subject. That's an absolutely great one. Dry humour, personable communication, inspirational personal journey, beautiful books and fabulous illustrations. So there's a lot in there. You know, I'm getting a real sense, Katrina, about what your books are like from that description, why your books are different from other people's books. So let me show you how to put together a key message. So using that sort of information, these are just some ideas. I want you to try and turn what you've done in that exercise into 3 distinctive key messages. And these are just some ideas about how you might do that. And Katrina, with your examples, what I think you could use is a nice trick. If you, obviously it's quite difficult to talk about yourself in really glowing terms. That can sometimes be quite awkward and feel quite strange. So I think what would work really well for your example, Katrina, is to talk about your inspiration for writing these books. And by talking about why you find the subject matter of your books particularly fascinating, you are implicitly then saying to your audience that these books are really interesting, these books are really, really fascinating, without having to say, my writing is fantastic, the way I write is so interesting. So you can say, I'm really inspired by whatever the type of science is that you're writing about in your books. I feel really inspired to write about it, and this is why. and that passion about your subject matter will come across to your audience. I love the idea of the combination of taking quite scientific content and conveying that with a humorous aspect. So I'd probably use that as another one of your key messages. And again, you can talk about that a bit like we've done in this exercise. You can talk about it in the third person in terms of what my readers tell me they enjoy about my book. So my readers tell me they really enjoy reading about scientific content, but the way that I write about it in a humorous way really appeals to them. So hopefully that just gives you a sense of how you might put together key messages. And I just wanted to spend a little bit of time on that together, because this really is the most important thing that you can do as a writer going into an interview situation. You can have the most fabulous interview technique in the world, but if you're not absolutely clear on what it is that you're saying to hook in potential readers, to really make the most of that situation, then it's not going to be effective for you. So that is a little bit about key messages. That's a little bit about what you want to say in your interview situation. And now we're going to move on to talk about, okay, I know I've got my key messages, got my interview, I know what it is I want to say. How can I really make sure that I make the most of this interview and convey these things? Now, a big part of this is demystifying the whole process. I think a lot of interviews, particularly with the traditional media, can feel quite daunting. So a lot of what I do is really demystify this process. There's absolutely no need to be worried about it. So a little bit about the different types of media interview that you might get involved with. So if you are being interviewed by a journalist for a print publication, what will usually happen is that you will have a much longer conversation with that person, and they will pick out particularly interesting parts of that interview, and they will quote you in a way that suits the story that they then decide to write as a result of that interview. So you'll often find with interviews for print publications that there's great swathes of what you say don't actually make it into the final version. And that's worth bearing in mind. It's also important to bear in mind that literally everything you say to a journalist may end up in print. So particularly with print journalism, you can end up having quite lengthy conversations with journalists, and you can start to feel very relaxed. You can they will often cultivate that situation to feel like you're talking to a friend. So it's important to remember that anything you say may well find its way into print. Broadcast interviews are a little bit different, so these can either be filmed. We'll go on a little bit later to talk about the really particular set of things that you need to think about when you're giving an interview online, as a lot of us are at the moment. But sometimes you're just recording audio. These can be live, which can feel scary. But actually, I think sometimes people give a more authentic, a more sort of conversational style in live interviews. So I know the first few times you do it, it can feel very daunting, but I think live interviews can work really well for writers. Otherwise, it can be a pre-recorded interview. What happens with those is sometimes they'll be edited, or sometimes the whole thing will just go out as live, the whole pre-recorded interview. So it's important when you go into an interview situation to understand exactly what type of interview it is that you're going into, because you'll want to behave differently according to the format of the interview that you're about to go into. As we said, a lot of interviews these days will use Zoom, Skype, Facebook Live, or any number of other online formats. And that's very much the case at the moment. And it's really important to remember that these skills are not just useful in terms of traditional media. Writers are now creating more and more of your own content. Most of you will have your own website. Most of you will have your own digital and social media channels that you're creating content to put on them. and being clear about your key messages and being able to convey them really effectively, you'll use a lot of these same skills and techniques in creating that content as well. This is just a bit of a reassurance message with this slide, really. I think a lot of people worry when they go into media training that what we want to come out with. Sorry, I'm just flicking over to look at the comments. Makes me think of "Never Trust a Journalist" poem by Wendy Cope. Yes, absolutely. If I've missed any questions as we've been going through them, please do save them up and ask them at the end. So we don't want super slick identikit spokespeople. The aim of media training isn't to make you like anybody else. And it's really important to remember that, because, you know, and I use this slide when I'm media training really senior people in corporate organizations that are speaking on behalf of, you know, big companies. It's, you know, we're looking for personality, and what good media training will do is help you to be as confident and relaxed as you possibly can be, or at least give the impression of being as confident and relaxed as you possibly can be in an interview setting. What we want is to allow your personality to shine through. We want you to be authentic. We want you to be animated, and we want you to be passionate about your subject matter. You don't have to do this. You don't have to follow a blueprint. You don't have to do this like anybody else does it. So that's just a bit of a kind of reassuring, hopefully, message that the aim of learning about good interview skills is to help you be relaxed and confident and convey what you want to convey. It's not to turn you into a different version of yourself. Okay, so you've got your key messages, got your interview, you know what the format is, you're getting ready. How are you going to prepare for this interview? And what is it that we're aiming for from your performance in this interview? So when I say control the interview, this isn't about, I think it can come across like, I want you to kind of be very Jeremy Paxman, adversarial, interrupt. It's not that at all. What you're looking for in an interview is, you are not just there to answer questions. You are there to answer questions, but you are also there to convey the information that you want to convey. And that's what I mean by control the interview, is to, yes, somebody will usually be there and you will usually be asking you questions, but you don't just need to answer the question. You can then use that question as a jumping off point to then move to your key messages, move to the things that you are there to communicate about your writing. And most interviewers, particularly interviewing authors and writers, will really welcome this. They will really welcome a writer coming into an interview situation having some really articulate, well-prepared things that you want to communicate in that interview. So it won't be an adversarial situation. Most interviewers will be absolutely thrilled if you come into an interview situation and you steer it to subject matters where you know you've got something really interesting to say. A really good rule of thumb is to try and stick to 3 key messages. It can be tempting to try and fit more in. It can be tempting to try and really cram information in. But just so you're able to be really clear about what you're there to say, and also just because beyond 3, it gets difficult to remember, because you really want to have 3 key messages that you've memorized. And I would advise you to try and stick to 3, even if it's a longer format interview. So prepare well. Find out as much about how the interview is going to work as possible in advance. Who's the presenter? Who's the interviewer? What's their style? What program will you be appearing on? What sort of content do they like on this program, so you can appeal to this audience? Even if I do a lot of work with BBC Radio Sheffield, for example, and I know that if I put a spokesperson up on the breakfast show, they will have a very different experience from someone who goes on the drive time show. So just, listen to the programme, watch the programme, find out as much as you can about what to expect. Think about the practicalities. Are you going to be live? Are you going to be pre-recorded? If you're going to be outside, what do you need to wear in order to feel comfortable? If you're going to be at home, and we'll talk a lot about this in a little while, make sure that you've controlled the environment and that you're in the right frame of mind. A really good tip for kind of the day of your interview, the day before your interview, is to get yourself up to date with what's happening in the news that day. You may find that your interviewer will, there'll quite often be some sort of left field questions and left field content that you won't have expected that comes into an interview. And of course, it's fine if you are not aware of a particular story that they refer to. But if they try and bring the interview up to date and make it really current by referring to something that's happening in the news that day, then it's just really good if you can kind of latch that onto that as well. And likewise, you may be able to use things that are happening in the current situation. So by staying on top of what's in the news, you may find a really lovely hook that you can use, which you can then jump off from and convey your key messages. So it's really nice to try and find something kind of current to hook your content onto if you can. Probably the second most important thing after getting your key messages right is to practice. So practice with a friend if you can, practice with yourself in the mirror if you're anything like me, practice when you're walking the dog by yourself, looking really weird, talking to yourself in the middle of a field, but practice saying this stuff out loud, practice expressing yourself in the way you want to be able to express yourself in that interview situation. And just remember, you are a storyteller, you're a writer. Interviews are just a different way of telling your story. So, you've got this, go into it with confidence. A few more kind of helpful tips on how to prepare. So particularly as writers, wherever you can use real and personal examples to kind of bring your story to life, that's great. But a bit like we were saying before about when you're creating your personal brand, you need to be really clear with yourself in advance if there's anything you don't want to talk about. So a lot of writers, we draw on personal experiences, we draw on things that have happened to us, and they may not all be things that we really want to go into in an interview situation. And actually, the last thing that you want to happen is to find yourself in that situation with an interviewer who's trying to draw that sort of information out of you and talk about your personal experiences, and find yourself saying things that you really wished that you hadn't. So I would advise if you write about subjects of this nature, if you draw on personal experience or just things that, I'm really not happy to talk about that in an interview, that's not something that I want to get into, that you do some bespoke media training. I do that with writers who have written books that draw on things that yes, they've written about it, but they don't necessarily openly want to speak about it in terms of first person, this is what happened to me. And there are some really clear techniques that you can use to keep the interview lighthearted, keep it really pleasant, but just make sure that you don't find yourself saying things that you then wish that you hadn't, because it doesn't feel very nice. But where you are comfortable, real and personal examples about either what's inspired you or what you've drawn on can work really well. Okay, so if the content of your books is quite specialist, and if you use any jargon, then try and keep that out of the interviews that you give. I'm just going to go back onto... Yeah, showing lots of passion in interviews sometimes gets me portrayed as a bit young and inexperienced. It backfires on me, Katrina's saying. I think that's absolutely fair enough. I think it's, as in all things, it's a balance, isn't it? I think you need to show passion, I think you need to show that you find the content of your writing to be absolutely fascinating, or why is anybody else going to shell out money to buy this book and read it? But you also do want to temper that with professionalism. So when I say passion, that is always in a sense of staying in control and remaining calm, but conveying that the content of your books is that you find it absolutely fascinating, and that you expect that readers will as well. That's kind of what we're going. That's what we're going for with that. Okay. Again, if there's any of these questions that I missed, then please do feel free to ask again at the end. So yeah, if the content of your books is quite specialist, then try and keep that jargon out of your interviews. Try and use plain English whenever you can in interviews. If an audience can't understand you, then your message is lost, and you've immediately kind of alienated that potential reader. A bit exactly as we were saying there, in your case, Katrina. So passionate is great, but always stay calm, and don't rely on notes. Now, I know that interview situations can feel a little bit daunting, and it can be tempting to prepare and take a load of notes into an interview, but it's always really obvious. Even if your interview is just going to be recorded, even if it's just an audio interview, you can always tell if someone's reading something out loud, and that's fine for the odd, bit and bob here and there. But it's always going to be more engaging if you are speaking naturally and speaking authentically. So, what I would advise is that you write out your 3 key messages. Now, do memorize those, but we've all been in, me, myself included, definitely have been in interview situations where we just get complete brain freeze and forget what day of the week it is and what our own name is. And having your 3 key messages written down is a really helpful anchor, that if you really do lose track of what it is you want to say, then you can refer back to those. But wherever possible, don't read from notes. And certainly don't over rely on them. This is just a little bit on technique. We talked before about where there may be territory that an interviewer might try and stray into, where you just want to really tactfully and gently steer them in a different direction. If they've asked a question that you are not comfortable answering, then you don't have to answer it. That's absolutely fine. And a technique that we use, and you'll see this, you'll probably notice this all the time with all sorts of spokespeople now, but we call it the ABC technique. So acknowledge the question, don't ignore what they've asked you, because that's always really obvious. But then you can use what we call a bridging phrase, and then communicate your key message. So essentially you're acknowledging what it is that they've asked you, you're using a bridging phrase, and then you are sticking one of your key messages on the end of that bridging phrase, and you are steering the interview, you are controlling the interview back to the content that you are there to talk about. Now, I usually advise that people learn just 2 or 3 bridging phrases, and they can feel a little bit weird and fake the first time you use them. And I know some spokespeople worry that they sound really obvious, and I would just reassure you that they really don't. If you can say things like, so I can understand why you'd ask that, but move effortlessly, unlike me, onto your key message. But what I'm really excited to talk to you about today is, and that immediately sounds engaging. It sounds like, oh, okay, there's something interesting here. Yes, that's true for a lot of people, but in my writing, again, the lovely trick of what my readers have told me is that, so these are all examples of bridging phrases. There's loads more. What I'd advise you to do is kind of take a look at these, find which ones feel natural for you, find which ones feel kind of appropriate to the content of what it is that you want to say in an interview, and try and memorize them. And if you're able to just use them naturally in an interview, then they won't sound weird or fake. Really, really strong spokespeople use bridging phrases all the time. And that's just a nice technique if you find that you're getting into territory that you want to steer away from, or even if you're not. Even if it's not necessarily territory that you're uncomfortable with, it's just, if you're thinking this is not what I'm here to talk about, these are ways that you can steer the interview and control the interview. Okay, how are we doing for time? So I'm going to try and leave plenty of time for questions. So I've just got a couple of slides now on some specifics around preparing for online interviews, because I know a lot of us have had to move to doing a lot of our work, a lot of our promotional work online. And there are a particular set of things that you should be thinking about when you're going to do an online interview. Or like I say, not just in a traditional media interview. This is, I want to film myself talking about something and I'm going to put it up on my Instagram account, or I'm going to film myself talking about something. I'm going to put it up on my website. All of this applies in all these situations. So the first thing I would say is that you need to test. You need to check your lighting, and you need to kind of go around with your, most of you will probably be using the webcam on your laptop, but if you're using your phone, whatever it is that you'll be using, actually move around your home with your phone or your laptop and find the place where the lighting works, where your face is as clear as it can be. I've got, because you then have to think about your background. So it's all about getting the balance between a background that isn't distracting, but the right lighting. So I actually put a lamp in front of my laptop because I've got my back to the wall and I've got my back to a window here. So if I don't put an extra lamp there, then it just isn't very clear. So think about your lighting, check the framing of the shot, what you're looking for ideally. And this is where I always hope I'm practicing what I preach at this point, is to have the webcam on your laptop or your phone about level with your eye line, and slightly pointing down if possible. But the most important thing is to have it level with your eye line. So if your laptop actually sits a bit too low down, then get yourself a couple of big books. I've got Hilary Mantel and Zadie Smith doing a grand job for me today, just lifting up the laptop to get it at the right point. Think about your background. I know as writers, and I know in a lot of media interviews lately, it's been battle of the bookshelves, hasn't it, in terms of backdrops, and as a writer that's great if you can kind of get the lighting to work with a bookshelf, although as has tripped up some people, be careful what books are on there. As a general rule, as plain a background as possible works really well. But by far the most important thing about the visuals is that it's stable and in focus, and you will only know that by testing. So make sure you do that. The other thing it's really important to test is your audio, and you can usually, you probably would usually need a friend to test that with in advance. This is even more important when you're creating your own video content. A lot of people understandably assume that if you're creating a piece of video content for your own channels, that the visuals are the most important thing, whereas evidence shows that audiences will tolerate sketchy visuals, poor quality visual content, much more than they will poor quality audio content. So you really do need to check that what you're saying is clear. So test all that in advance. Try and find yourself a place that is as private as possible, where you're not going to be interrupted. But what I wanted to say on this was, I think particularly in the current circumstances, everybody understands that things aren't ideal. Everybody understands that people are balancing a lot of different things in their home life at the moment. So if you are interrupted, it's not the end of the world, and it's much better to kind of deal with that calmly as you can, rather than showing stress. I was in quite a big work meeting over Zoom a couple of weeks ago, and someone was interrupted by one of their children, and they started telling them off really angrily, and you kind of understand, everyone's sort of stressed, but it comes, you saying to one of your children, yes, it's fine, darling, if you go and have a banana, is going to create a much better impression than you losing your temper with them. So it's worth bearing in mind. It's good to have a really private space, but don't stress if you're interrupted. Just deal with the interruption as quickly and calmly as you can and move on. So in an online interview situation, we're looking for you to come across as professional, but also relaxed and engaging. So this is very much a case of individual preference. So if you find that you're struggling to relax, you're struggling to kind of feel natural, then sitting down is probably the best way for you to give your interview. If you're really struggling with kind of getting some energy into what you're saying, with being engaging, you could always try standing up. So again, this is where all the testing comes in, because you really need to find what works for you and check that it works before you move on to the actual interview itself. It's always worth dressing as if you're attending in person, at least on top. I've got my slippers on, I don't know, I'm sure a lot of you have as well, but for your top half that will be visible, it's worth dressing in the same way that you would if you were attending an interview in person. It just kind of sets the right tone, and psychologically, as much as anything, I think it's a good habit to get into. Good posture, this is where I definitely don't practice what I preach. So think about the way that you're sitting, the way that you're standing, and how that is translating into the image on screen. A really nice tip, particularly when you're being interviewed by someone and you can see them on your screen, the tendency is to look at that person on your screen. But actually, if you look directly into the webcam, then that can be much more engaging for the people who are watching. So particularly if you are talking about things where you're really wanting to hook in your audience, you're saying things that you really hope will resonate with the people listening to this interview, try and actually look into the lens of your webcam. It feels a bit weird, but that does come across as more engaging for an audience. Just a couple of notes on the tech side of this. So make sure, particularly if you're going to be doing any screen sharing, that you've closed down any other apps or windows on your phone or your laptop. This is also good for performance. The last thing you want is for your tech to cut out because it's got too many things running. But also, if you have a machine that does the notifications when you get new messages, you will probably want to check out the do not disturb mode on your machine and put that on. Another thing to consider when you're deciding where to create your area for your interviews is it may be that you need to be in quite close proximity to your Wi-Fi router. There's a website, fast.com, where you can check the speed that you're getting, and for a lot of these online platforms, the faster speed, the better. So it's just worth checking your connection and checking your Wi-Fi speed. So that's just a couple of really kind of practical things to think about. So, but as I say, the most important thing is that you kind of find a way to relax, feel as confident as you can in this situation. As I said, you've got this, you are storytellers, you know how to tell a story. And an interview situation is really just another way for you to tell the story of you as a writer and what your books are all about. So I am really happy to share the slides from this presentation. What I'm going to do, that's my website address at the bottom there. So if you go to my website and join my mailing list, I will send out the content of this presentation today. I think it's also going to be recorded, so you can watch it back. But yeah, has anybody got any questions? Look at that, kept it to an hour. Oh, that's a great tip. Alice Little says, a friend of mine has googly eyes around her camera, so she remembers to look up that. I think I might steal that, Alice. That's a really good tip. I even put perfume on for online events. Yeah. Do you know, I haven't worn perfume for about 6 weeks, so I think I might. Harry Potter slippers. Oh, you're welcome. Thank you, Suzanne. I'm glad it was useful. So yeah, we've got, I think we've got about 10 or 15 minutes. If anyone does have any specific questions that they'd like to ask. Can you offer more help to work out branding? Hello, Paula. Paula and I used to be in the same book club, so it's lovely to have a friendly name in there. Oh gosh, so yeah, I mean, it's tricky to kind of do it in 10 minutes. But your personal brand, and particularly what I try and do with writers, I know for a lot of writers it can feel very daunting. It almost, I think some writers, not all by any stretch of the imagination, but some writers almost feel like it's sort of compromising their creative integrity to create that brand and really think about selling themselves and their work. So the way I like to think about branding is really exploring what writing is all about for you. Why do you do it in the first place? What inspired you to become a writer? What inspires you to write your books? And we really kind of distill that down and use that as the basis for a personal brand. So I talk about it being quite cart before the horse. So when you first, kind of on your first day of doing marketing training, when you're doing it as a personal qualification, they teach you about something called the marketing orientation, which is where you put your audiences at the heart of everything you do. So it's about designing products and services with an audience already in mind. And that's what marketing in its purest form is. But for creative people, that doesn't really work, and neither should it, because what you're doing is you're creating something that's coming from inside you. It's coming from what inspires you. So we really explore that. And then we kind of, once we've got a really good sense of what writing's all about for you, we use that as the jumping off point for a personal brand, which you can use. It's all about articulating and expressing what is different and special about your writing and how you can differentiate yourself from all the other writers out there. But the more authentic to yourself you can make that, the more effective it is. So that's kind of in a nutshell. The other thing to say is that I will be launching some online courses in June that will cover a lot of this stuff in more detail. So please do sign up to my mailing list, and I'm going to give people on my mailing list advanced and discounted access to those courses. So that will explore all of this in more detail. Yeah, another tip from Caroline is smile when you speak. It makes you sound more warm and friendly. I definitely would agree with that. It can be difficult to smile if you're feeling anxious and you're feeling nervous, which I know a lot of people do in interview settings. But sometimes if you kind of make yourself smile, then that has an impact on how you feel, which in turn has a effect on how you're coming across. Yeah. Oh, so lots of lovely comments. Thank you. I'm really glad that's been useful. So I've got a question here. What if you're not a naturally confident speaker? How can you overcome your nerves? So this is an issue for a lot of people. It's an issue for me, and I think the answer will be quite personal to you, and what you know makes you feel more relaxed and more confident. So it's all about kind of getting yourself set up in a way that is going to enable you to feel as relaxed and confident as you possibly can. And then certainly what works for me, and I know what works for most people, and the biggest thing that I would say is practice. And that's not easy when you're not a naturally confident speaker, because the last thing you want to do is practice doing something that you're uncomfortable with. But I promise that the more you do it, the easier it gets. And the more natural it feels, and the more you will be able to kind of relax in that sort of setting. So, as I say, start off by practicing with a friend. Start off by practicing by yourself. I think I said before, I'm a great one for when I'm going on a walk with my dog, practicing what it is that I want to convey, thinking through what it is I want to convey. So it will be different for everybody, but my biggest piece of advice for people who don't feel confident, who need to overcome nerves, is to practice. And the more you do it, the less scary it will get. Okay. Yeah. So Simon's saying that he answers a question and then stops and throws the ball back into the interviewer's court. So that can work if you're wanting to shut down a particular line of questioning. But if you're wanting to keep the interview kind of feeling nice and conversational, which I think the best interviews do, the best interviews become a conversation, then I'd recommend that you just try using a bridging phrase and steer the interview on to an area, rather than just stopping and then letting the interviewer retain control of that interview and ask you another question. You might want to try just steering the interview into subject matter that you've prepared, subject matter that you know you want to communicate. Okay. Oh, you're all very welcome. Thank you for the lovely comments. Yeah, so Anne-Marie says, I did a TV interview recently and the assistant kept smiling at me as I was speaking. I'm hoping that was helpful, Anne-Marie. I'm hoping that was a positive thing that made you feel more relaxed. But yeah, certainly having a friendly face can make a really big difference. Yeah, great point from Katrina there. So always remind myself, talk to the audience. So an interview, you are talking to the person who's interviewing you, obviously, in that situation, but you're not really. What you're really doing is you're talking to the audience of that program. And that's a very, very helpful thing to bear in mind. Absolutely. Just going through, seeing if there's any more questions. Yeah, Sylvia Brody's saying that she gives talks to groups about her writing life, and I try and tailor the talk to the audience. This is something that I've learned from trial and error. Absolutely. Yeah, and Caroline says, how important is it to give short answers? How do you not ramble? You'll definitely find that preparing your key messages helps you with that. That and practicing. So preparing the things that you are there to communicate and practicing saying them. I think what I would say on that is I think we all have a tendency to really overestimate how much we ramble. Don't be too hard on yourself. If you're talking about something that's very interesting, then a little bit of elaboration, a little bit of exploration of that topic, depending on the interview setting. Obviously not if you have 5 minutes to introduce yourself before an online reading, for example. You don't want to kind of go off into a long story about your personal experiences, but don't be too hard on yourself when it comes to rambling, because I think if you're talking about something interesting, it can be absolutely fine. So Reshma is saying, I hope I've pronounced that right, Reshma. She's saying, I have an unusual name and people find it difficult to pronounce. I would certainly say, from my view, is that if someone's interviewing you, they should at least learn how to pronounce your name correctly. And what you could do if you want people to know is to, again, talk about what a reader has said to you. And that will give you the opportunity to talk about yourself in the third person from the perspective of your reader. And then you can drop in your own name if that's something that you really want to do. Yeah. So someone's saying, how would I work one-to-one with a debut author in terms of establishing their personal brand? I think what I try and do is, as much as possible, is demystify all of this. So as Francesca said, I've worked in comms and marketing for 17 years now, but my first love is writing. I'm a fiction writer myself, unpublished. And this is the field that I absolutely love. And I know it can feel daunting for a lot of writers when they start to think about marketing themselves and promoting their books. So a lot of what I do is demystifying that whole process. There's absolutely nothing to be worried about or frightened about. It can actually be lots and lots of fun. So it's all about kind of creating that personal brand that feels right, so that you can then promote yourself in a way that feels really authentic. You don't feel like you're being fake and doing something that, okay, my writing is over here and then the promotion of my writing is over here and it's something completely different. We really kind of bring those two things together. So then who you are and the way you write is really part of how you promote your work. And then, as I say, it's a lot of work to just demystify the whole process and simplify things. It's focusing on a few things that you'll be able to do well. So we work on putting together a personal brand, a really strong, authentic personal brand. We then use that as the basis for a marketing strategy. We look at kind of navigating the absolute minefield that is digital and social media. And then I do a lot of this. I do a lot of media training as well. So those are kind of the main areas that I would work with a debut author on. And it's really fun. And I think hopefully through demystifying it kind of takes something which can feel quite daunting and quite intimidating and just makes it part of, the enjoyable side of being a writer. Okay. Can you rely on the interviewer to interrupt you if you go on too long, or should you have a sense of how succinct to be? That will completely depend on the interviewer, Caroline. Different interviewers will have different techniques. Most interviewers, particularly, it'll depend on what they're trying to do, but particularly if it's for broadcast, yes, they will interrupt you, because they will have as much interest as you do in keeping that interview really engaging, really interesting, keeping their viewers or their listeners tuned in. So absolutely, if it's for a print interview, they may be more interested in letting you ramble on and be interested in where those more meandering conversations might lead. So it will completely depend. So I think we've got time for just one more question, if there are any more in here. Yeah, that is absolutely fine. Mia Farlane's made a comment that it's not your responsibility to fill silences. That is absolutely true. So where it suits your purpose to move the interview on and steer it into territory that is what you want to talk about, then definitely do that. Where it doesn't, then no, it's absolutely not your responsibility. Having said that, I think particularly as writers, I would perhaps say that advice is more true of other types of spokespeople. You are there as a writer to engage readers. So I wouldn't necessarily use the technique of giving short answers and leaving silences much if what you're trying to do is appeal to potential new readers. Do you offer one-to-one coaching around personal branding? Yes, absolutely. I'm doing that at the moment. So if you're interested in having one-to-one sessions on developing your personal brand, developing your marketing strategy, then my web address is there. There's a space at the end where you join the mailing list. You can put a note and ask me to contact you, and I will do that. And it's we can arrange one-to-one sessions at the moment. And then, as I said, I'll have some online courses that different people can sign up to, launching in June as well. Okay, so thank you for all those really lovely comments. I'm glad it's worked well. I'm glad it's been engaging, and I'm glad you found it useful. And thank you for all the fantastic comments and contributions and questions. I'm glad we've managed to make it quite interactive despite the format. So thank you all for coming. I've really enjoyed that. I hope you have too.
Thank you, Anna. That was a brilliant session and so useful. So much information packed in.
Yeah, I hope it wasn't. I hope it's not information overload.
As Anna said, we did record the session, so you will receive a link to watch it back on Catch Up. And you can obviously go and sign up to Anna's mailing list to receive copies of the slides. So thank you so much, Anna, for running this session for us, and thanks to everyone who joined in today with lots of questions and comments. Just a reminder that all these sessions are free, and if you do want to donate a few pounds to the Authors Emergency Fund, the link is at the top of the chat. Tomorrow we have a session coming up with Arts Council of Wales and Creative Scotland on funding and sustaining creativity, and that will be with me as well. And Thursday's afternoon tea is with Tracy Chevalier. So if you'd like to book, there's still places available. Just go to societyofauthors.org/events and you can register for free. Again, if you're on social media, the festival hashtag is SOA at home. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you.